Hey folks, Roleplaying Game here. I just want to briefly announce that the Quick and Dirty RPG system is now available on DriveThruRPG for $4.99. That's almost a 40% price reduction from its original retail price of $8, which makes it easier for you to get a copy of my labor of love to the RPG hobby in your preferred devices. Also, don't forget to grab a copy of the Quick and Dirty character sheets and other profiles at a price of pay what you want. The links to both products are in the description. Now, onto the video. Greetings folks, I'm Roleplaying Game and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. In this video, I want to talk about whether or not a tabletop role-playing game can be both tactical and cinematic. The impetus for me to talk about this has been the discussion I saw on Ghostfire Podcasts number 106, where they talked about their thoughts on their playtest of the MCDM tabletop role-playing game being developed by Matt Colville and his MCDM team, along with further discussion on Livestream number 138 from Knights of Last Call. When I first listened to Matt Colville talking about the 4 objectives that he wants this TTRPG to cover: heroic, fantasy, tactical, and cinematic, I was skeptical about how he could pull off making a tabletop role-playing game that is both tactical and cinematic, but still open-minded about the possibility that he can pull it off somehow. To phrase it as David from Knights of Last Call would, I was interested in seeing what kind of new tech Matt would bring to the table. Time passed, and Ghostfire Podcast number 106 popped up on my YouTube feed, which mentioned thoughts on playtesting Matt's tactical and cinematic heroic fantasy TTRPG. On the video's title card, however, it displayed a green check mark next to the words tactical, heroic, and fantasy, but not cinematic, which had a red X next to it. One of the comments that stood out in that video was something along the lines of, "This system will be really good for a video game RPG." With Matt Colville's history of video game development, I'm not surprised that this sentiment was made about the current state of the MCDM tabletop RPG. Matt has also expressed being one of the people who really enjoyed D&D 4th edition, which I bet is a great source of inspiration for the MCDM tabletop role-playing game. Both games share the same 6 attributes, even if they're worded differently. Both games place a great emphasis on characters playing according to their role in a skirmish combat unit. And both games use grid-based combat. And I wouldn't be surprised if MCDM's game also has abilities that force movement on their targets. So this begs the question, where's the cinematic aspect of the game? To go even deeper, what did Matt Colville mean when he said he wanted his game to be cinematic? When it comes to being tactical, the discussion from Ghostfire Podcasts made it pretty clear what that meant: positioning, grid-based battle maps, resource management, and optimal use of a character's abilities within the context of team-based skirmish combat. In other words, a board game or a video game. This doesn't stop with combat either. Apparently there's a social minigame within the MCDM tabletop RPG referred to as negotiations. The panelists at Ghostfire Podcast expressed that it felt like these types of social encounters made them feel like lawyers in some sort of arbitration settlement, with talk about the subject having patience points and various tactics that can be used to skew their disposition to the PC's favor, etc., etc. It gave me vibes of the intrigue system from Green Ronin's A Song of Fire and Ice tabletop role-playing game, with a matrix of social tactics versus dispositions and a whittling down of social hit points. It was just way too gamified for my taste to be put into practical use. With that being said, even in the case of a social conflict, there's this heavy emphasis of a tactical approach of a minigame. When it comes to being cinematic, however, I don't recall Matt exploring what it is for a tabletop RPG to be cinematic. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the adjective cinematic refers to that which relates to, is suggestive of, or is suitable for motion pictures or the filming of motion pictures. When I think of things being cinematic in a tabletop role-playing game, I imagine events playing out as if I were watching a movie. Events play out in scenes, and scenes are composed of various shots, where the camera changes its perspective based on what the focus is. When we're not relying on a battle map and minis, the medium by which stuff within a game session occurs is in the imagination of each player and the GM, with the GM guiding the players with their descriptions of what's around them and what's going on. It is in our imaginations where the emerging story of the game sessions can be cinematic. Our mind's eye shifts the perspective of the scene to what the focus is for the individual player. When we refer to the battle map and the minis, however, the focus is not on the imagination, but on this representation of the environment and the combatants that is specifically designed to measure exact distances, impassable and movement slowing terrain, and each combatant's position relative to each other. In other words, this is a tactical representation of a battlefield, not a cinematic representation of a battlefield. If a film were to keep their focus on a top-down bird's eye view of a skirmish battle from start to finish, it would look like various types of insects, lizards, and worms taking turns one by one moving into position of their places and launching microscopic versions of arrows, lightning bolts, gouts of flame, or what have you until one side stops moving. It resembles something like watching an American football game, which I find to be incredibly boring. This in no way resembles how skirmish combat has been displayed in cinema, whether it's a Hong Kong action flick, a western, a spy movie, a thriller, a superhero movie, or a war movie. In those scenes, the camera is shifting from one shot to another, focusing on key moments as the action scene gets ever closer to its conclusion. It's snappy and dynamic, and no one stays in the same place, even in a boxing match scene. A tabletop role-playing game with cinematic action does the same thing. Nothing stays in the same place for long, and the action is moving ever forward to some sort of conclusion. This is not to say that it's impossible for a tabletop role-playing game to be both tactical and cinematic, but the old paradigm that Matt Colville is using for the MCDM's rules make it so that the more tactical the game is, the less cinematic it is. It's also important to note that there isn't just one way for a tabletop role-playing game to be both cinematic and tactical, and I'll provide two examples of tabletop role-playing games that are both tactical and cinematic, but in different ways. Should have been ready for this. Okay, so the first game of these is Sentinel Comics, the role-playing game. In this superhero tabletop role-playing game, an action scene is framed so that there's always a timer in the form of a scene tracker, and there are a bunch of objectives to fulfill before the scene tracker goes beyond the red zone. Because precise movement isn't really a thing, there's no need for a battle map or minis. If you want your character to perform a heroic task with an uncertain outcome, explain how you're using your traits to accomplish the task at hand, and roll your dice to see which of the 5 potential results you get. The same flexibility and interpretation of trait use goes for attacking your opponents, helping out your teammates, hindering your opponents, defending yourself or an ally, or healing yourself or your allies. The tactics come into play when it comes to special abilities, which has specific rules for how they're used and with what they do. The more powerful abilities are only usable in the yellow or red zones, but you can always use them beforehand while incurring a twist, meaning that some sort of complication will occur as a result. Perhaps you have an ability that would require you to put yourself in a situation that would normally be harmful, and the opportunity has presented itself. How do your abilities interact with those of your teammates in a way that make them better than simply being a one-man show? The tactical nature of this game harkens to the Sentinels of the Multiverse card game, as both are created by the same company, Greater Than Games. The second game that comes to mind as being both tactical and cinematic is Lone Wolf Fists by Joel Clark. In this game, you play as a superpowered martial artist in a similar vein as Kenshiro from Fist of the North Star, D from Vampire Hunter D, or Rebi Ra from Demon City Shinjuku. basically an exalted character. Your class and rank determine how much dice you roll in combat, called the effort pool. By rolling matching sets, you can accomplish truly impressive feats of strength, agility, endurance, intellect, perception, and spirit, made even more possible by use of mystical martial arts techniques. These martial arts techniques, however, require a resource called prana, which is spiritual energy that characters can harness at various rates, depending on how many open chakra they have. While characters can perform one action per round by default and require at least one rolled die in order to defend against an incoming attack, matching sets allow them to perform multiple attacks and also serve as a requirement to activate certain martial arts techniques. Since the effort pools are rolled before actions are determined, similar to the board game Dead of Winter, the hemming and hawing of how to best use the results that are rolled, including which to add to your focus slots, adds that tactical element to the cinematic nature of high-octane kung fu cinematic action, since a grid-based battle map is not required. Characters can freely interact with any element within the scene to try to turn the tables in their favor in ways that work about how they'd expect them to work in the real world, aside from magic. The game refers to this as the tactical infinity. So there you have it. While the context and focus of the game can shape how it represents tactical play, to make it cinematic as well, the tactical aspect has to allow for the player characters to go beyond the bounds of the buttons that they can push in their ability bar. Their character sheets, so that they can do cool shit. Can a tabletop role-playing game be tactical, cinematic, and balanced? I don't think so, but that's a discussion for another time. If you like or dislike anything in this video, please give it a like or dislike and leave a comment, keeping it respectful and relevant. Subscribe if you want to support my channel, and if you really want to support my endeavors, head over to my Patreon and become a member. The link is in the description. Until then, folks, take care and play to find out what happens.